I could hear them laughing in the living room. The sound of clinking wine glasses, the shuffle of flip-flops on my hardwood floors, and the occasional pop of a champagne cork. The sound was bitter to me, not because I hated laughter, but because I knew exactly where that joy had come from. $50,000. That's what they spent on their once-in-a-lifetime family summer vacation to Hawaii, just months after telling me they couldn't possibly scrape together the $7,000 I needed to save my own life. My heart surgery. The words alone felt like a bad joke now. I was supposed to be grateful that they had helped in other ways, like driving me to doctor's appointments or bringing me store-bought casseroles. But the reality, they'd let me stare death in the face and said, "Sorry, Grandma, that's too much for us right now." And yet, just 3 months later, they were on a white sandy beach, holding cocktails with little umbrellas, smiling for Instagram, wearing brand new matching swimsuits. Not one of them thought twice about how I'd feel. I sat in my bedroom that night, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazily. My chest still hurt sometimes. Tightness, a reminder that the surgery had been delayed longer than it should have been. I'd gotten the operation thanks to my own stubbornness and an unexpected act of kindness from a neighbor I barely knew. It wasn't my family who saved me. It was a stranger. And because of that, something inside me changed forever. I didn't yell when I found out about their vacation. I didn't cry in front of them. I didn't even confront them. No, silence was my answer. Because I knew what they didn't. I was going to make them pay. Not with money, no, though that would come later. I was going to take something from them that they would never get back. Something they valued more than my life. But first I had to wait. I had to smile through dinners and Sunday lunches, nod through their endless bragging about Hawaiian sunsets and snorkeling with turtles. I had to let them think I had moved on. I had to let them believe they were safe. Because my revenge, it wasn't just going to hurt. It was going to leave a scar. I guess I should tell you a little about myself before you start thinking I'm some bitter old woman with nothing better to do than plot. My name is Margaret Collins. Maggie to my friends, Grandma Maggie to everyone else. I'm 83 years old, born and raised in Kansas, though I've lived in upstate New York for the past 40 years. My late husband, Walter, was a school principal. I was a librarian. I've got 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and 6 grandchildren who used to be the center of my universe. Used to be. Before this past year, I would have told you that family was everything. I would have told you that blood meant loyalty, that children always took care of their parents in their old age, and that love was unconditional. I don't believe that anymore. I still love them, but not in the same way. Not with blind trust. You see, I'm blonde. Always have been. Though now it's a softer silvery blonde that I keep neatly styled, because if there's one thing I refuse to let go of, it's my dignity. I wear my pearl earrings every day. My neighbors tell me I have movie star posture. But here's the truth, I'm tired. My body's not what it used to be. And earlier this year I found out just how fragile life really is. It started with shortness of breath, then chest pain, then dizziness so bad I had to sit down just to make it to the kitchen. My cardiologist told me my heart valve was failing. The fix was surgery, a valve replacement. The cost, after Medicare, $7,000 out of pocket. Now, for some people that's a lot. For others, not so much. My family. They're not rich, but they're not struggling. My son works in finance, my oldest daughter's husband owns a construction company, and my youngest teaches at a private school. Between the 3 of them, they vacation every year, drive decent cars, and eat out at restaurants I can't even pronounce. So when I asked, no, begged for help, I thought they'd come through. I remember the phone call. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, I told them. It's just $7,000. Can pay you back over time. I need the surgery or I won't. My voice broke. I didn't want to say, I won't make it. But we all knew what I meant. There was a pause. Then my son, Jason, cleared his throat. Mom, that's a lot of money for us right now. Things are tight. We'll try to help in other ways, okay? Other ways. I hung up that night feeling like someone had scooped the air right out of my lungs. But like I said, help came from somewhere else. My neighbor, Mr. Green, overheard me talking to the mailman about my situation. 2 days later, there was an envelope in my mailbox with a note. "Maggie, you've always been kind to me. Don't pay me back, just get better." Inside was a check for the full amount. I cried harder than I'd ever cried in my life. I had the surgery. I recovered. I lived. And my family. They visited twice while I was in the hospital. Once to bring me flowers. Once to ask if I needed anything from the store. Then 3 months later I saw it. The Instagram post. The 6 of them, Jason, my daughters Claire and Beth, their spouses, and all the grandkids, lined up in matching Hawaiian shirts, grinning in front of a bright blue ocean. The caption read, "Best $50,000 we've ever spent. Memories that will last forever." Now I'm not a fool. I know life isn't fair. I know people make choices. But sitting there looking at that photo, I felt something twist inside me. They'd chosen to let me almost die. But they had no trouble dropping $50,000 for fun. That was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to forget. I wasn't going to forgive. And I wasn't going to warn them. The first seed of my plan came a week later, during Sunday dinner at Claire's house. The conversation drifted to money. College funds, investments, real estate. I sat quietly, sipping my tea, while they discussed how the family cabin in Vermont needed some work before it could be rented out again. That cabin was special to them. It had been in Walter's family for generations. The kids grew up spending summers there. They called it our legacy. And as I listened, I realized I still had a legal stake in that cabin. Walter had left his share to me. And that was just the beginning of what I still owned. I didn't say a word that night. I just smiled, patted the grandkids' heads, and went home. But when I closed my front door, I stood in the quiet and felt my lips curl into a smile. They had no idea what I was about to do. They had no idea that I was about to take their legacy and turn it into something they would never see coming. And then, just as I was sketching out the first steps of my plan, the phone rang. It was Jason. "Mom, we've been thinking," he began, his tone a little too careful. "There's something we'd like to ask you about the cabin." I froze, my hand tightening on the receiver. This was it. The opening I needed. And I was going to take it. Jason's voice on the line had that certain tone I'd heard all his life. It was the same tone he used when he was 8 years old and wanted to borrow my car keys to pretend drive in the driveway. The same tone he had at 16 when he wanted me to pay for his prom tuxedo after he'd already promised his father he would use his summer job money. Cautious, almost sweet, but calculated. "Mom, we've been thinking." He hesitated again, which only told me he was figuring out how to make his idea sound like it was in my best interest instead of his. I didn't say a word. I've learned over the years that silence has power. It makes people fill the air, and when they fill the air, they often reveal more than they mean to. "Well, you know the cabin in Vermont," he continued. "It's been sitting empty most of the year, and the property taxes are a lot. Claire was saying maybe it's not worth the trouble anymore. We thought, maybe you'd want to, I don't know, sign over your share so we can manage it better." There it was. The family legacy they always bragged about suddenly became a burden, until they realized I was still part owner. "I see," I said softly, keeping my voice light, almost airy. "And how would you manage it better?" "Well," he said, brightening, "we could rent it out during ski season, maybe renovate it a little, make it more modern. You wouldn't have to worry about taxes or repairs. We'd take care of everything." I leaned back in my armchair, my heart thumping. Not from weakness this time, but from the thrill of watching my plan start to breathe on its own. "And in return?" "Yes." Jason chuckled awkwardly. "Well, I mean, you'd be free of all the headaches. No more bills from the county. No more contractors calling you about a leaky roof. We just need you to sign a quitclaim deed. And then everything would be on us." I let out a little sigh, one that I knew he'd interpret as weariness. "Let me think about it," I murmured. "Of course, Mom," he said quickly. "No pressure. We just thought it might be a good solution for everyone." For everyone. Funny how that word changes meaning depending on who's speaking. After we hung up, I walked over to my desk, pulled out the small metal lockbox I keep in the bottom drawer and opened it. Inside was a folder labeled Walter's will. I sat there for a while, reading over the lines I'd memorized years ago. Walter had been deliberate, almost stubborn, about splitting his estate evenly. Half to me, the other half split among the kids. He'd known me well enough to know that someday, sentimentality might get drowned out by practicality. That cabin wasn't just a memory. It was an asset. Valuable one. And now it was going to be my weapon. The next Sunday, I showed up at Claire's house for our usual dinner. I wore my nicest cream-colored sweater and a string of pearls Walter gave me on our 25th anniversary. My hair was freshly set, my makeup light but deliberate. If you're going to play a role, you have to look the part. They were all there, Jason with his wife, Melissa, Claire and her husband, Tom, and Beth with her boyfriend, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The grandkids were sprawled on the living room floor, their eyes glued to a video game. Dinner was roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. I could smell the butter and garlic before I even stepped into the kitchen. "Mom, you look lovely," Claire said, kissing my cheek. "Thank you, dear," I replied, my voice warm, as if the bitterness I carried had been swept out with the morning trash. We sat down to eat, and halfway through, Jason cleared his throat. "So, Mom, have you given any more thought to what we talked about?" Claire's fork paused in midair, and Beth leaned forward slightly. "Yes," I said, dabbing my lips with my napkin. "I have." The room went quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher in the background. "And?" Jason prompted. I smiled, tilting my head. "I think you're right. The cabin is a lot to manage. Maybe it would be better for me to step back." Jason's face lit up. Claire's eyes darted toward him, as if to confirm she'd heard correctly. "That's great, Mom," Jason said. "You won't regret it." "Oh, I'm sure I won't," I murmured. I took another bite of potatoes, then set my fork down. "But I'll need something in return." Melissa blinked. "In return?" "Well," I said, my tone light, "if I'm signing away something that's been part of my life for over 40 years, I think it's fair that I get, let's say, $60,000. You could have heard a pin drop. Jason actually laughed, though it sounded more like a bark. "Mom, that's not how this works. You can't just—" "Of course it's how it works," I interrupted sweetly. "You want my share. I name my price." Tom cleared his throat. "The place isn't worth that much." "Oh, it's worth far more than that," I cut in, looking him straight in the eye. "But I'm giving you a family discount." Claire shifted uncomfortably. We thought you'd be happy just not having to deal with it anymore. And I thought my family would help me when I needed heart surgery," I said softly. Silence. Melissa dropped her gaze to her plate. Jason's jaw tightened. "We don't need to decide tonight," I said, standing up. "Think it over. Let me know before the month's out." And with that I excused myself, kissed the grandkids goodbye and left. The next day I got a call from Beth. "Grandma," she began, I don't think it's fair that you're making them pay for something that's supposed to be family property." "Beth," I said calmly, "it was also supposed to be family when I needed help. Funny how fairness seems to depend on who's asking." She didn't respond. A week passed. Then two. On the third Sunday Jason called again. "Mom, we've decided to pass on buying your share," he said, his voice stiff. "It's just not in the budget right now." Of course it wasn't. Not after dropping $50,000 on a vacation. "That's fine," I said lightly. "I'll find another buyer." "What?" His voice cracked. "You can't." "Oh, I most certainly can," I said, and then I hung up. That night I called a real estate agent I knew from church. A quiet man, discreet, with a knack for getting things done. Within 2 weeks we had 3 interested buyers. And one of them, a company that specialized in luxury rentals. They offered me $85,000 for my share, no questions asked. I signed the papers without hesitation. The closing date was set for the end of the month. And I didn't tell my family a word. The day before closing, I got an unexpected visitor. Melissa. She showed up at my door, her blonde hair tucked behind her ears, her eyes wide and pleading. "Margaret, please," she said. "Don't sell your share. The cabin means so much to the kids. We'll find the money eventually." I stood there, letting the silence stretch. Then I smiled faintly. "Melissa, I gave you the chance. You made your choice." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're punishing us." "No," I said quietly. "I'm teaching you." The next day the deal went through. The company wired the funds to my account. And that afternoon my phone started ringing. Jason, Blair, even Beth. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Because the real revenge, that was still coming. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail from the new owners. They were renovating the cabin into a high-end rental, meaning my family would need to pay full market rates if they ever wanted to use it again. I laughed until tears rolled down my cheeks. It was perfect. And yet, that was only the first step. Because while they were still reeling from the loss of the cabin, I was already moving forward with part 2 of my plan. Something far bigger, far more personal. Something that would hit them exactly where it hurt most. But I'll tell you this, part 2. It started with a wedding invitation. And by the end of that wedding, my family would never look at me the same way again. The envelope came on a Thursday. It was ivory with gold edges, thick enough to feel expensive between my fingers. My name, Mrs. Margaret Collins, was written in neat cursive across the front. The handwriting was familiar. I didn't even have to open it to know who it was from. Blair. Inside, tucked between 2 sheets of thin tissue paper, was a wedding invitation. Not for Claire, she'd been married for years, but for her oldest daughter, my granddaughter Sophie. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Sophie Henderson and Luke Patterson." The date was 2 months away. The venue, a sprawling vineyard in California, complete with scenic hills and, I knew from the name alone, a price tag that would make my old librarian salary look like pocket change. I stared at it for a long time, my mind ticking like a clock. My first thought was that I should be happy. Sophie was 24 now, a sweet girl when she wanted to be, but one who had learned early that she could get anything she wanted if she batted her eyelashes at the right person. My second thought. I was about to be handed the perfect stage for part 2 of my revenge. You see, weddings bring out the best and worst in people. There's pride, vanity, competition. It's a showcase. For dresses, for money, for status. And my family. They thrived on looking like the picture of wealth and togetherness. I knew what they would expect from me. To show up, smile politely, and fade into the background while they preened for the photographers. But that wasn't going to happen. No. I was going to give them something to remember. Something they could never crop out of the wedding album, no matter how much they wished they could. I spent the next few weeks quietly preparing. The first step was the outfit. I didn't want anything gaudy. That would be too obvious. I wanted elegance, power. A presence so commanding that every head would turn when I walked in. So I went to the most exclusive boutique in Albany and tried on dresses I never would have considered before. Jewel tones, rich fabrics, perfect tailoring. The saleswoman kept saying, "Oh, this one is divine. And you look like royalty." In the end, I settled on a deep emerald green gown that made my silvery blonde hair glow and brought out the color in my eyes. It fit me like it had been sewn for me alone. Then I had my hair styled into soft waves, and I bought a matching clutch. Not because I needed it, but because it would be the perfect place to carry what I planned to bring to the wedding. Step 2 was making arrangements for my surprise. I can't tell you exactly what it was, not yet, but I can say it involved a few phone calls, some discreet inquiries, and a small sum of money wired to the right person. By the time the wedding week rolled around, everything was in place. The day before I was set to leave for California, I got a call from Jason. "Mom," he said cautiously, "you got the invitation, right?" "I did. We want to make sure you'll keep things pleasant. For Sophie's sake." There it was again, that underlying fear that I might say something. That I might remind them in front of their friends of what kind of family they really were. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice as smooth as honey. I wouldn't dream of ruining Sophie's day. Oh, good. He sounded relieved. We'll see you there. When I hung up, I laughed to myself. Because what I had planned wasn't going to ruin Sophie's wedding. It was going to redefine it. The vineyard was even more extravagant than I expected. Rolling green hills, flowers in full bloom, the air warm with the scent of roses and wine. Rows of white chairs lined the aisle, each tied with satin ribbon. Guests milled about in tailored suits and flowing gowns, sipping champagne. I spotted my family clustered near the front, Jason in a dark blue suit, Claire in a champagne-colored dress, Beth in pale pink. I walked toward them, my gown flowing like water, and for a brief moment, I enjoyed the way people turned to look at me. "Grandma," Sophie said, coming up to hug me. "You look amazing." "Thank you, darling," I said, kissing her cheek. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The ceremony was lovely. Sophie cried, Luke cried. Even Claire dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I sat there quietly, my clutch resting on my lap, my heart calm. Because I knew what was coming next. The reception. That was where the real show would begin. Dinner was served under a massive white tent strung with fairy lights. Guests dined on filet mignon and halibut, with champagne poured so freely it might as well have been water. Speeches began after dessert. The best man, the maid of honor, Sophie's father. Each one more sentimental than the last. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. "Now," the DJ said, "we'd like to invite Grandma Margaret to say a few words." All eyes turned to me. I stood, smoothing my gown, and walked slowly to the microphone. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady. "I'm honored to speak on such a beautiful day, for such a beautiful couple." I could feel my family watching me closely, waiting for me to make a scene. But I didn't. Not at first. I spoke warmly about Sophie, about how I'd held her as a baby, how I'd watched her grow into a young woman with a bright future. I complimented Luke on the way he looked at her, on the steadiness in his eyes. Then, as I reached the end, I said, "There's something I'd like to give Sophie and Luke as a wedding gift. Something that comes from the heart." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a crisp white envelope. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the deed to a piece of property in Vermont. A beautiful cabin surrounded by trees and mountains. It's worth far more than any check I could write." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. I could see Jason stiffen in his chair, Claire's eyes widening, Beth's lips parting in disbelief. "This cabin," I continued, "was part of my late husband's family legacy. I sold my share earlier this year and bought it back in full under my name. Today, I'm giving it entirely to Sophie and Luke." Murmurs. Jason's face turned red. Claire's hands curled into fists in her lap. "I hope," I said, smiling, "that you'll make beautiful memories there, ones that last a lifetime." The applause was polite but scattered. My family sat frozen, their perfect wedding day masks cracking right in front of everyone. Sophie hugged me, tears in her eyes, thanking me over and over. Luke shook my hand, clearly stunned. But as I walked back to my table, I felt Jason's hand clamp down on my arm. "What the hell was that?" he hissed. "A wedding gift," I said sweetly. "Didn't you like it?" "You're playing games, Mom." "Oh, Jason," I murmured, pulling my arm free. "You have no idea how many moves are left on the board." That night, while the dancing went on and the wine flowed, I slipped away early. I had no interest in the after-party, because I knew my phone would start ringing soon enough. And when it did, I would be ready. It started the next morning. First a call from Claire, furious. Then from Beth, demanding to know why I'd sidelined the rest of the family. And finally Jason again. But this time his tone was different. Cold. "I hope you know," he said. "You've just started a war." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Jason," I said softly, "that war started months ago. You just didn't notice until now." But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Because part 3 of my plan. That one wasn't going to be public. It was going to be private, intimate, And it was going to hurt them in ways money never could. The first step of part 3 started with something most people overlook: the family trust. And by the time I was done, my children were going to wish they had just given me the $7,000 when I asked. After the wedding, I knew the invitations to Sunday dinners would slow down. And I was right. The very next weekend no one called. No "see you at Claire's." No "bring your famous apple pie." Just silence. By the second week, I could practically feel the wall they were building around me. They weren't just upset, they were furious. Not because I'd given Sophie the cabin, but because I'd done it in public. In front of friends, neighbors, and every extended family member they were trying to impress. The Collins family liked to look united, untouchable. I torn that picture right down the middle. And I wasn't done. I've learned something in my 83 years. The quiet moves are the deadliest. You can slap someone in the face in public, sure, but the bruises heal. Take away what they think is theirs, without warning. That leaves a wound that festers. So one rainy Tuesday morning, I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a folder I'd been keeping for years: the Collins family trust documents. Walter and I had set it up back when we thought our children would always be close, always treat each other with respect. Back when I believed they would never put vacations over my life. It was a generous trust, split evenly among my 3 children after my death. Meant to cover their retirements, help with the grandkids' futures, and make sure the family property stayed in the family. That trust was about to change. The first step was calling my lawyer, Mr. Hale. I'd known him since Walter passed. He was sharp, discreet, and didn't mind bending a few rules as long as they stayed legal. "Margaret," he said, his voice warm over the phone, "what can I do for you today?" "I need to make some amendments to my trust and my will," I said. "Effective immediately." There was a pause. "Significant amendments." "Very. I can come to you this afternoon." When Mr. Hale arrived, I had coffee and lemon cake waiting. Not because I needed to butter him up, but because I've learned that people work better when they feel cared for. We spread the documents out across my dining table, the rain tapping against the windows. "Walk me through exactly what you want," he said. I took a deep breath. "Jason and Claire are out. Completely. Not 1 cent. Mr. Hale blinked. "That's a bold move. Beth gets $10,000, and only if she completes her nursing degree. The rest," I paused, savoring the moment, "goes to Sophie. But it will be locked in a fund she can't touch until she's 40. Mr. Hale's pen scratched across the paper as he took notes. "And the property. All of it, the house, the remaining land in Kansas, everything I own, goes into a separate holding company. Ownership transfers to a charity I'm setting up." "What kind of charity?" I smiled faintly. "One that helps elderly people pay for life-saving medical care when their families can't, or won't, step up." Mr. Hale actually chuckled. Poetic. By the time we finished, the amendments were airtight. Jason and Claire would get nothing. Beth would get a token amount if she straightened herself out. Sophie would eventually get more than she knew what to do with, but not before she'd learned the value of patience. And my children. They would wake up one day and realize the family wealth they'd been counting on had simply vanished. I thought I'd feel guilty. I didn't. Not even a little. 3 weeks later I got a call from Claire. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, "Jason says you've been making changes to the trust." I didn't even bother to ask how she knew. Jason had always been nosy enough to dig through records when he wanted to. "Yes," I said simply. "Why?" "Because I can." "That's not fair." I almost laughed. "Fair? You mean like when I needed surgery and you all decided it wasn't the right time to help me? Or when you spent $50,000 on a vacation while I was still recovering?" There was silence on the line. Then, "Mom, this isn't about that." "It's exactly about that." Hung up. After that, the messages started coming in. First from Beth, trying to play the peacemaker. "Grandma, can't we talk about this? Maybe over lunch." Then from Jason, full of thinly veiled threats. "You're making a mistake. You're going to regret it." And finally, from Melissa, who didn't even try to hide her disgust. I always knew you were selfish. Now everyone else does too. I didn't reply to any of them, because replying would have meant explaining myself. And they didn't deserve explanations. The funny thing about cutting people off financially is that it reveals their true selves faster than anything else. By week 4, Jason showed up at my door. He didn't knock politely. He pounded. "Mom, we need to talk," he barked when I opened the door. I didn't invite him in. "About what?" "You know damn well about what. You can't just cut us out like this. That money is mine," I said firmly. "It's mine until the day I die. And I can do whatever I please with it." His jaw clenched. "You're going to die soon, Mom. You really want to go knowing you've turned your own kids against you?" I smiled coldly. "Jason, my kids turned against me the day they left me to die." He flinched like I'd slapped him. Then he turned on his heel and stalked down the walkway, slamming the gate behind him. 2 days later I got a letter. It wasn't from Jason or Claire. It was from a law firm. The letter said they were representing concerned beneficiaries who believed I was acting under undue influence and making decisions that were not in right mind. In other words, my own children were trying to have me declared mentally unfit. If they succeeded, the trust would be frozen. My assets would be controlled by a court-appointed guardian, likely one of them. And all my careful plans would be for nothing. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. They'd crossed a line. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was war. And if they wanted a fight, they were about to see exactly how much fight their sweet old mother still had in her. The first step. Finding out exactly who was behind it, and hitting them where it hurt before they even stepped into a courtroom. Because this time I wasn't just defending my money. I was defending my name. And I knew exactly which secret I was going to use. I didn't sleep much the night I got that letter. It sat on my nightstand like a loaded gun, its bold black print practically daring me to make the wrong move. Mentally unfit. That phrase rattled around my head like a loose marble. In my 83 years I'd been called a lot of things. Stubborn, opinionated, too independent for my own good, but never incapable of thinking for myself. They wanted to drag me into court, hold up my age like it was proof I didn't know what I was doing. And worst of all, they wanted control. Not just of my money, but of me. If they won, I'd lose the right to decide where I lived, how I spent my days, what I did with every single penny. Well, that wasn't happening. The morning after, I called Mr. Hale. "They've gone too far," I told him, my voice shaking. Not with fear, but with a kind of rage I hadn't felt since Walter's funeral. "If they think they can smear me in court, I'll smear them first." He was quiet for a beat. Then, "What exactly are you thinking, Margaret?" "I'm thinking," I said, "it's time I start digging. If they want to put my character on trial, I'll make sure the jury gets a good long look at theirs." I didn't know where to start, but life has taught me that if you're patient, people hand you the rope they'll hang themselves with. And Jason handed me the first piece without even realizing it. That Friday I went down to the bank to withdraw some cash. While I was there, I bumped into Karen, one of the tellers who'd known me for years. "Margaret, it's been ages," she said, leaning over the counter. "You know, I saw your son in here last week. Looked like he was in a hurry." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yeah, big withdrawal. The kind that makes the manager double-check the paperwork." I didn't press her. Small towns have big ears, but I left with a little itch in my brain. Jason was always loud about his smart investments, the stock tips he bragged about at dinner. But cash withdrawals that large, those weren't investments. Those were problems. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my old laptop. I may be 83, but I can still find my way around a Google search. I typed in Jason's name and the name of his firm. What I found wasn't explosive, not yet, but it was smoke. There were 2 complaints against his company filed with the Better Business Bureau. Both claimed mishandled funds. Both were recent. If I could find the fire under all that smoke, I could burn his case to the ground. Claire was trickier. She didn't handle big money directly, but she had something even more fragile: reputation. Claire's whole life was built on being the perfect one. PTA president when her kids were in school. Organizer of charity galas. Friends with all the right people. But perfection has cracks. And I remembered one night, years ago, when Walter was still alive. Claire had called in tears, saying she'd been in a little fender bender. Walter went to help her, came home 2 hours later with a tight jaw, and told me never to bring it up again. The story never sat right with me. So I called my friend Mabel, who still worked at the county records office. "Mabel," I said, "can you pull a police report for me? Car accident. About 12 years ago. Driver was Claire Henderson." Mabel didn't even ask why. We've traded enough favors over the years. When she called me back, her voice had that edge it gets when she knows she's holding a hot potato. "Margaret. It wasn't just a fender bender. She hit a cyclist. Broken arm, 3 cracked ribs. And she was over the legal limit." I sat very still. "Was she charged?" "Nope. The victim didn't press charges. Settlement was handled privately. Private settlements leave trails. If I could find the payout, I could prove Claire wasn't the flawless community darling she pretended to be." Beth was last. My youngest. She'd always been the free spirit, drifting from one job to another, one boyfriend to the next. I didn't think she had much to hide, until I remembered something Sophie had let slip at the wedding. Beth's boyfriend can't come because of, his situation. At the time I'd smiled and moved on. Now I wondered what situation meant. It took one phone call to an old friend of Walter's, who worked in the sheriff's office, to find out. The boyfriend was under investigation for theft, high-value electronics from a warehouse. Not convicted yet, but Beth's name had come up in a witness statement. If Beth was tangled in something criminal, it could wreck her credibility in court. By the end of that week I had 3 threads. Jason, suspicious withdrawals, BBB complaints. Claire, a buried DUI with an injured victim. Beth, tied to an active theft investigation. Individually they were just family embarrassments. Together they were dynamite. I called Mr. Hale again. "I'm sending you some information," I told him. "I want it organized into a neat little packet. So if they keep pushing this court case, we'll walk in with more ammunition than they can handle." "Margaret," he said, "this is impressive." I smiled faintly. They raised me to be polite. Walter raised me to be prepared. And life taught me to be dangerous when cornered. 2 days later, Mr. Hale called me with an update. "They've filed the petition. Court dates in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That was all the time I had to sharpen my knives. The following Sunday, Claire broke the silence and called me herself. "Mom," she said, her voice sweet like artificial sugar, "we don't have to do this in court. If you reverse the changes to the trust now, we can forget the whole thing happened." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Claire, you sound like a mob boss in pearls." "This isn't funny. It's hilarious," I interrupted. "Because I know things, Claire. Things you'd hate to see printed in the local paper." The silence that followed told me she knew exactly what I was talking about. I hung up before she could answer. That night, as I locked my front door, I spotted a shadow at the edge of my yard. It wasn't a neighbor. Too tall, too still. When I stepped closer, the figure turned and walked quickly down the street. I didn't recognize him, but I recognized the feeling in my gut. This wasn't just going to be a court battle anymore. Someone was watching me. I didn't sleep much after seeing that shadow. You get to my age and you stop ignoring gut feelings. That prickle along the back of my neck. That wasn't paranoia. That was experience whispering, "You're being watched." The next morning I made myself a strong cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, going over my week. I had errands planned. Groceries, a meeting with Mr. Hale, a visit to the library. But all I could think about was that figure at the edge of my yard. Was it just some random passerby? Or was it connected to Jason, Claire, and Beth? I couldn't take chances. By 10 a.m. I was at the hardware store on Main Street, buying something I never thought I'd need: a motion-activated security camera. The clerk, a young man with an easy smile, showed me the options. "This one streams to your phone, Mrs. Collins," he said. "And it has night vision." Bought two. By lunch, I had one mounted above my front door and another facing the street. My neighbor Pete helped me set them up, not asking questions, though I saw the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Expecting trouble?" he asked, half joking. "Just keeping an eye on things," I said, smiling like it was nothing. That night, I sat in my recliner, knitting, while the live feed from the cameras played on my tablet beside me. At 11:42 p.m., I saw him. Same height, same stillness, standing just far enough away to be in the shadows, but close enough to be watching the house. This time he stayed longer, almost 15 minutes. Then he walked away. I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, I printed a still image from the footage and took it straight to Mr. Hale. "Margaret," he said, studying it, "that's not random. Whoever this is, they're there for a reason. You think my kids sent him?" He didn't answer directly. "In cases like yours, it's not uncommon for people to hire private investigators to look for leverage." I stared at the grainy photo. "They're digging for dirt on me." "Likely," he said. "Which means they're desperate. And desperate people make mistakes." On my way home, I stopped at the diner for lunch. While I was waiting for my sandwich, I saw a man at the counter reading the paper, and my stomach dropped. It was him, the watcher. He didn't look at me, but I noticed his eyes flicked to the reflection in the chrome napkin holder on the counter. He knew I'd seen him. I didn't confront him. Not there, not in public. Instead, I paid my bill, walked out calmly, and went straight to Pete's house. Pete used to be a cop. He's retired now, but he still has the instincts. When I showed him the photo from my camera and told him about the man at the diner, Pete's face went hard. "You want me to tail him?" he asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Find out who he is. And if he's working for someone." Pete nodded. "Consider it done." 2 days later, Pete showed up at my door with a manila envelope. "You were right," he said, handing it over. "Name's Frank Daly. Licensed PI out of Albany. Guess who hired him?" I opened the envelope and pulled out the paperwork Pete had found. My hands clenched. Claire. She'd signed the contract herself, paying Daly to investigate the financial and personal activities of Margaret Collins. In other words, she was trying to build a case that I wasn't fit to handle my own affairs. I could feel my blood pressure rising. But instead of getting angry, I smiled. Because Claire had just made her first big mistake. She'd left a paper trail. That trail was going to lead right into the next stage of my plan. I called Mr. Hale the next morning. "I need you to draft something," I told him. "A letter to the court. We're going to inform them that Claire Henderson has engaged in surveillance designed to intimidate and harass me." "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It's not an accusation," I replied. "It's a fact. And I have proof." The letter went out within 24 hours. 2 days later, Claire called me. "You had no right," she snapped. "No right to protect myself from being stalked." Said coolly, "Claire, I have an entire folder with your name on it. Keep pushing me, and I'll make sure it's public record. You wouldn't dare. Try me." That week, something unexpected happened. Beth came to see me in person. She looked nervous, standing in my kitchen with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "Grandma, I don't want to be part of this anymore," she said quietly. "The court stuff, the PI, all of it. It's gone too far." I studied her face. Beth had always been the softest of the three, easily swayed but also easily guilt. "Then get out," I said. "Withdraw from the petition. Publicly." She swallowed hard. "If I do, will you keep my name out of whatever you're planning?" "Maybe," I said, letting the word hang. That night I got another visitor, but this one didn't knock. I was in the kitchen when I heard the faint creak of the back gate. By the time I stepped into the yard, the figure was already there, Not the PI this time, but someone taller, broader. "Who are you?" called. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward just far enough for me to see his face. "Jason." Only. This wasn't the polished, clean-shaven Jason I was used to. His jaw was rough with stubble. His eyes bloodshot. His mouth twisted in a way that made my stomach clench. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. I didn't move. "About what?" "About ending this before it gets ugly." I met his stare. "Jason, it's already ugly." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "Do you?" That's when he stepped closer. So close I could smell the faint tang of whiskey on his breath. "You keep this up, Mom," he said softly, "and you're going to regret it in ways you can't even imagine." I didn't blink. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Pete must have seen him from his porch, because a moment later, the back gate banged open again and Pete's voice boomed. "Everything all right here?" Jason stepped back, his expression tightening into something unreadable. "We're done," he muttered and pushed past Pete, disappearing into the dark. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding. Jason wasn't bluffing. I could see it in his eyes. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel until now. Fear. But fear can be fuel. If Jason wanted to play this game without rules, then neither would I. And I knew exactly how to start, by showing up somewhere he never expected me to be. 2 days later, I was sitting in the back of my car outside his office building, watching through the windshield as Jason walked out with a man I didn't recognize. They got into a sleek black SUV, laughing. Pete sat beside me, camera in hand. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I said. Because whatever Jason was hiding behind that office door, I was going to find it. And when I did, it would be the end of him, in court and out. Jason had always been careful about his image. Expensive suits, clean shoes, the kind of smile that made strangers believe he was trustworthy. But as Pete and I followed that black SUV through the streets of Albany, I started to see the cracks. The man driving wasn't just a colleague. The way Jason leaned toward him, speaking in quick, clipped sentences, told me this was business he didn't want anyone else to know about. Pete kept a safe distance, his eyes locked on the taillights ahead. "They're not headed to his office," he murmured. "Well, they were headed somewhere far more interesting." 20 minutes later, we pulled up to a squat, unmarked building on the edge of town. The kind of place you'd miss if you didn't know it was there. Jason and the man got out, glancing around before slipping inside through a side door. Pete lifted his camera. "This is where it gets fun." "What is this place?" asked. He smirked. "Let's find out." We didn't go in, that would have been too risky. Instead, Pete walked the perimeter, snapping photos of the entrance, the cars in the lot, the loading bay in the back. "Looks like a storage facility," he said when he came back around. "But no signage, and too much foot traffic for a place that's just holding boxes." "What do you think it is?" "Could be anything," he said. "But given Jason's cash withdrawals, I'd bet it's not legal." We stayed until Jason came out an hour later, carrying a black duffel bag. My stomach tightened. Pete snapped photo after photo. Jason with the bag, Jason getting into the SUV, Jason shaking the man's hand. "Got him," Pete said. Back at Pete's kitchen table, we went through the photos one by one. The grainy zoom shots weren't perfect, but they were clear enough. My son walking out of a suspicious building, holding something he clearly didn't want to be seen with. Pete leaned back in his chair. "This is enough to rattle him. Not enough to sink him." "I don't need to sink him yet," I said. "I just need him to know I can." The next morning I printed the clearest photo, Jason mid-step with the duffel bag, and slipped it into an envelope. No note, no return address. By noon I got a call. "What the hell is this?" Jason's voice was tight, almost panicked. "Proof that I know where you go on Tuesday nights," I said calmly. "You've been following me. Consider it evening exercise." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "Stay out of my business, Mom." Then stay out of mine. For the next week, the PI stopped showing up outside my house. Jason didn't call. Claire kept her distance. Beth texted me once. Things are getting tense, and I ignored it. It almost felt quiet. Almost. Then came the pre-trial hearing. I arrived early, wearing a navy suit Walter had loved, my hair pinned neatly, pearls in place. Mr. Hale walked beside me, carrying a slim leather folder. Jason, Claire, and Beth were already there, sitting with their lawyer. None of them looked at me. The judge was a stern woman with silver hair and sharp glasses. She flipped through the file in front of her before speaking. We are here today to address the petition to remove Margaret Collins as trustee of the Collins Family Trust, she said. Counsel for the petitioners, you may proceed. Their lawyer launched into a speech about my advanced age, my erratic decisions, and my history of questionable judgment. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, until he was done. Then Mr. Hale stood. Your Honor, he said, before we proceed further, I'd like to submit Exhibit A. He handed over the photo of Jason with the duffel bag. The judge studied it, her brow furrowing. And this is evidence, Mr. Hale said smoothly, that one of the petitioners may be engaged in activities that, if revealed, could call into question his own judgment and credibility before this court. The silence in that room was delicious. Jason shifted in his seat. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. Beth's eyes darted between them like she wanted to vanish. The judge set the photo down. Is this true, Mr. Collins? Jason cleared his throat. That's private. Not in my courtroom, she said flatly. We didn't win that day. The case wasn't dismissed. But we'd drawn blood. Jason knew it. I knew it. And now I had the upper hand. After the hearing, as we were leaving the courthouse, Claire caught up to me. This is going to destroy the family, she hissed. I stopped, turning to face her. Claire, the family was destroyed the day you hired someone to spy on me. She glanced around, lowering her voice. You don't know what you're messing with. Oh, I do, I said. And the best part. I'm just getting started. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my living room, the house quiet except for the ticking of the old mantel clock. For the first time since this all began, I felt almost calm, until my phone buzzed. The message was from an unknown number. Enjoy your little victory today. It's the last one you'll get. Attached was a photo of me, standing in my kitchen, taken through my window. The photo hit me like a blow. Me in my own kitchen, my hands on the counter, my hair in its usual soft set, the pearls at my throat. It was the angle that made my stomach turn, from outside peering in through the half-open curtain. I didn't remember leaving that curtain open. My hands went cold. I read the message again. Enjoy your little victory today. It's the last one you'll get. It wasn't Jason's number. It wasn't Claire's. It wasn't Beth's. Which meant someone else was now involved. And whoever it was, they'd been close enough to my house to take that shot without me knowing. I didn't call 911. Not yet. At my age, you learn that rushing to the police can sometimes backfire, especially if you don't have the whole picture. I needed to know who was behind this, and whether it was just intimidation, or something worse. So I called Pete. When I told him what had happened, he was at my door within 15 minutes. He studied the photo. Angles from your side yard, he said. Near the hydrangeas. Whoever took it was close. And bold. Think it's Jason. Pete's jaw tightened. Could be. But this feels outsourced. He set his coffee down. We're going to set a trap. That night, Pete brought over 2 more motion-activated cameras, one disguised as a birdhouse, the other as a porch light. We angled them toward the side yard and the street. Then I left the curtain half open again, just like in the photo. Inside, I placed a brightly lit lamp right by the window so anyone looking in would be clearly visible on camera. We waited. It was almost 2 in the morning when Pete's phone buzzed with a motion alert. There, he whispered, pointing at the feed. A figure stood in the yard. Not Jason. Not the PI from before. This man was taller, with a heavy build and a hood pulled low over his head. He moved slowly, deliberately, raising something that glinted under the light, a camera. He snapped 2 photos, then pulled back. We let him leave. Pete wanted a full tale, but I had a different idea. The next morning, Pete traced the plates on the dark sedan the man had gotten into. They were registered to a security company out of Albany, a company with no website, no advertising. Digging deeper, Pete found something interesting. The same company had been hired 2 months ago by Jason's firm. That was enough for me. I called Mr. Hale and told him to meet me at his office. When I walked in, I laid the printed photos from both nights on his desk, the one sent to me and the one from my hidden camera. I want this on record, I said. And I want it tied to Jason officially. Mr. Hale leaned back. Margaret, this isn't just intimidation anymore. This could be criminal harassment. Good, I said. Then let's treat it like a crime. By the following week, Mr. Hale had filed for an emergency protective order. When Jason was served, he called me. Mom, what the hell is wrong with you? Kept my voice calm. Jason, you hired someone to stalk your own mother. That's what's wrong. I was just. You were just proving every reason why you shouldn't have a cent of my money, I cut in. And you've done it beautifully. The protective order hearing was the turning point. Pete testified about following the PI. The security company's records, subpoenaed by Mr. Hale, showed clear invoices billed to Jason's office. The judge wasn't impressed. By the end of the day, not only was the protective order granted, but the judge openly questioned Jason's credibility in the ongoing trust case. It was the crack I'd been waiting for. 3 weeks later, the court ruled in my favor. The petition to remove me as trustee. Denied. Every amendment I'd made to the trust. Held. Jason and Claire. Completely. Beth. Eligible only if she finished her degree. And the judge made sure to note that, given recent events, that was far from guaranteed. When the ruling was read, Jason's face went pale. Claire's lips pressed so tight they almost disappeared. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I'd already won. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Word had gotten out about the protective order and the trust dispute. Mrs. Collins, one of them called. What would you say to your children now? I looked straight into the nearest camera. I'd say this. Family should be the ones who stand by you when you need them most. If they choose not to, they shouldn't expect to stand with you when life is good. And they certainly shouldn't expect to inherit the rewards of a life they didn't help build. That night, I sat on my porch with Pete, sipping tea as the sun went down. It was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in months, there were no watchers in the shadows, no strange cars on the street. Just the sound of crickets and the hum of the evening air. Pete raised his mug. You did it, Maggie. I smiled faintly. I protected what was mine. And I made sure they'll remember why they lost it. A week later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photo. Jason, standing in front of that unmarked building, the black duffel bag in his hand. On the back, in neat block letters, someone had written, "Thought you might want another copy. In case you ever need it." I didn't recognize the handwriting. But I knew one thing. The war might be over for now. But somewhere out there, someone else knew Jason's secrets. And if the day came when I needed to protect myself again, I'd know exactly where to start. The envelope stayed on my kitchen table for days. Every morning I'd pour my coffee, sit down and stare at it. The photo of Jason, the black duffel bag, the neat handwriting on the back. Thought you might want another copy. In case you ever need it. It wasn't just a reminder of what Jason had been up to. It was a message. Someone out there wanted me to know they were watching him too. And the question that kept turning in my mind was, why? By Thursday, I couldn't stand not knowing. Called Pete. We're going to find out who sent this. Any ideas where to start, he asked. Whoever it is knows about Jason's trips to that building. And they're not afraid to send me proof. That means they either want him exposed, or they want me to owe them. Pete grunted. Both are dangerous. We went back to the unmarked building. Only this time we didn't park across the street. We parked in the lot of a gas station 2 blocks down and watched through binoculars. At 4:17 p.m., Jason arrived. No SUV this time. He was alone in his own car. He walked in carrying a slim briefcase. He checked his watch. Now we wait. 40 minutes later, a woman came out of the building. Dark hair. Business suit that looked more expensive than anything I'd ever worn in my life. She climbed into a silver sedan and drove off. Pete snapped photos as she passed. She's not just an employee, he said. She carries herself like someone in charge. That night Pete ran the plates. The car was registered to Riverside Holdings LLC, a shell company. And the name on the registration. Melissa Collins, Jason's wife. I sat back in my chair, my stomach knotting. Melissa wasn't just involved. She was in the middle of it. The mystery sender of that envelope could be someone inside her operation. Or maybe someone she'd double-crossed. Either way, it meant the perfect opportunity had just landed in my lap. I called Mr. Hale the next morning. I want the judge to see this, I told him. Margaret, the trust case is over. I know. This isn't about the trust anymore. This is about leverage. By Monday, Mr. Hale had the new photos packaged neatly alongside the old ones. And just as I suspected when Jason found out, the calls started again. First angry, then nervous. By Wednesday night, the tone had shifted entirely. Mom, let's talk. Just you and me. No lawyers. I almost laughed. Jason, the only talking I'm interested in now is in front of someone who can put it on record. That was when he made the mistake of saying the one thing that changed everything. If this gets out, Melissa's going to lose everything. And I'm not going down alone. Froze. What are you saying? I'm saying, his voice dropped, that if I fall, I'm taking your granddaughter with me. That was the moment my revenge stopped being about just me. Because now it was about protecting Sophie. And the only way to do that was to dismantle Jason and Melissa completely. I'd always believed revenge was best served cold. But this time I didn't have the luxury of waiting. If Jason was threatening Sophie, even indirectly, I had to move fast. So I called in every favor I'd ever been owed. Pete reached out to an old contact in the state's financial crimes division. Mr. Hale called a friend in the DA's office. And Mabel from the records department dug up months of filings linked to Riverside Holdings LLC. What we found made my blood run cold and hot, all at once. Shell companies, fraudulent contracts, large cash withdrawals followed by consulting fees, paid to accounts in Melissa's maiden name. It was enough to bring them both down. The next step was delicate. If I went to the police right away, Jason might try to spin it, or worse, destroy the evidence. So I baited him. I called and told him I'd consider keeping quiet if he signed over the deed to the Albany townhouse he and Melissa used as a rental. He didn't even hesitate. Fine. We'll do the papers tomorrow. The following afternoon, Jason showed up at Mr. Hale's office with the deed. His face pale but defiant. Here, he said, sliding it across the desk. Now you've got what you want. Stay out of my life. I met his eyes. Jason, I think you forgot something. I opened my bag and pulled out a thick folder. Every photo, every document, every record we'd collected. If you ever threaten Sophie again, I said, my voice steady, this entire folder goes to the DA. And you and Melissa can explain yourselves in an orange jumpsuit. He didn't speak. He just stood, his chair scraping the floor, and walked out. I thought that might be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, Melissa was arrested. Not because of me, but because someone else had tipped off the state investigators about Riverside Holdings. Jason wasn't charged, but the scandal destroyed his career. His firm dropped him. His friends stopped returning calls. And as for the Albany townhouse, I sold it within a month and donated the proceeds, every last cent, to the charity I'd set up for seniors needing medical care. The day the sale closed, Sophie came to see me. Grandma, she said softly, Mom and Dad are saying you ruined them. I looked her in the eye. No, Sophie. They ruined themselves. I just stopped them from ruining anyone else. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she hugged me, tighter than she had since she was a child. I'm glad you're on my side, she whispered. That night, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out over my quiet street. The war was over. Not because I'd destroyed them, but because I'd taken back my power. If this story made you believe that standing your ground is worth it, no matter your age, then tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have gone this far, or would you have walked away? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because the next story might just make you question what you would do when the people you trust the most turn on you. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world.